A lot's going on in the world, including the fact that I think economics and Media Monday may be taking the day off, but I'll see if Nick shows in and if he agrees with that or if that's what they've got going on. But either way, there's a lot happening in the world, so we've got to keep track with what's happening in the world. Apparently, the world leaders are condemning Israel after dozens were killed in a Gaza tent camp that killed 45, and apparently this is prompting some sort of global outcry and all along those lines. So that is one of the things that I am seeing in the news updates and all along those lines. A Papua New Guinea landslide apparently has buried 2,000 people. So that's what the officials there are saying. And apparently King Charles is shocked and saddened by the landslide that buried 2,000 people. So apparently rescuers are still searching for some missing people in that particular disaster and all along those lines. And like I said, Hamas is firing rockets at Israel's Tel Aviv, causing the first sirens for months. And apparently they're claiming responsibility for firing missiles into Israel. And of course, we've got the elections here in the United States, but we've also got them in the UK as well. And apparently, Sunak is pitching a mandatory conscription for 18-year-olds. So it looks like he's trying to get a draft in that area. So Rishi's national service pledge is bonkers. That's what an ex-military chief says, and all along those lines. But I'm sure there's some people that are in that particular country that are probably glad to see that idea and to see what goes on. I know Sasha's talked about the notion of even us bringing the draft back here to the United States and all along those lines. And apparently, China is courting top U.S. Allies on trade, but apparently they're trying to get some trade with places like South Korea and Japan. So leaders of South Korea, China, and Japan are to resume trilateral meetings. So it looks like they're trying to get some trade going on with areas that are seen as allies of the United States. So China is calling on Japan and South Korea to reject protectionism in a trilateral summit. So that is what they are saying as well. And apparently 12 Qatar Airways passengers were injured as a Boeing jet hit turbulence en route to Dublin. So it was en route to Dublin, and apparently it hit some turbulence. And the passengers said they feared it was the end as Qatar Airways flight hit extreme turbulence. And one of the passengers said they were still shivering, and another one said you were just lifted off the seat as that airway is investigating as 12 were hurt on that flight between Doha to Ireland. So that's something else that's in the news. And South Africa elections are taking place. So they're saying the South African election could bring the biggest political biggest political shift since it became a democracy. So South Africa has failed its black majority. That's what some folks are saying. And Nelson Mandela's political heirs may pay the price. So definitely it looks like there's going to be a big rally, and we're going to see who wins in South Africa. ANC is holding its final rally in Soweto. So that is something else that is going on. And China is hyping a video for a mass Taiwan attack, as apparently they're trying to flex their military muscle as well. And it looks like Ireland has expelled the Israel envoy and is warning of the impact on the high tech industry. So definitely that's something else we're seeing as the EU and Israel are in a war of words as ties nosedive ahead of Spain and Ireland recognizing Palestine as a state, or Palestinian as a state. So that is something going on as well. And it looks like Mexico is expected to elect its first women president. So it does look like there'll be a woman running Mexico, and it looks like definitely that'll be something that folks will be paying attention to. And some people are even saying that this could be a reset for the relationship between America and Mexico and all along those lines. And the Georgian Parliament committee has rejected the presidential veto of the divisive foreign bill that was there as well. So that's something else that we're seeing in the news and that people are paying attention to as well. And North Korea is planning to launch a rocket soon, likely carrying its second military spy satellite. So North Korea is telling Japan of its plans to launch a military satellite by June 3rd. So that'll be in about a week and all along those lines. And France is to lift the state of emergency in an effort to allow political dialogue in the riot-hit New Caledonia. And in India, voters are sweating their way toward the end of the election. So in the phase 6 turnout, the turnout has risen to 66.4%, which exceeds the polling in the previous kind of areas as well. So it does look like the elections are going on over there in India, and apparently a lot of folks are coming out, and we'll see who wins in that space. And Bangladesh has evacuated hundreds of thousands as a severe cyclone is approaching, and Zelensky is warning of Russian advances as Kharkiv strike death toll rises. So definitely that conflict is still raging as well. And Ukraine's Zelensky also visited Spain in pursuit of more weapons to fight Russia with. So Spain is to send Patriot missiles and Leopard tanks to Ukraine in a $1.23 billion package. So it does look like they'll be getting some support from Spain as well. So they're definitely getting support from various countries in the West and all along those lines. And if you're wondering about the weather on Memorial Day and everything, it looks like a deadly storm turned northeast with 68 million at risk of severe weather and all along those lines. And apparently dozens were taking cover in a gas station as a tornado hit. I don't know that you want to take cover at a gas station. That's just my own personal opinion, because that might be a lot of things that are toxic as well as explodable. So I don't know why you would be trying to hide out in a gas station, but maybe Rick's got some ideas about that as well. And Louisiana deputies are searching for 4 inmates who escaped from jail. So there's a manhunt in Louisiana for 4 escapees, including 3 homicide suspects. And like we've talked about the animals and what they might do and everything, apparently a bear has mauled a teen with a rare disorder as he watched TV in an Arizona cabinet. So the bear mauled the 15-year-old boy as he was watching TV in Arizona and got him on the nose and the cheek. And apparently the teen miraculously survived the bear attack after the brother rescues him and all along those lines. So good to see that some of that brotherly love was going on and all in that space. And it looks like Trump had a long shot libertarian nomination bid that was halted by the party chair. And I know that apparently there were folks who were trying to get RFK to be the nominee, but that is not the case. The nominee for the Libertarian Party will be a gentleman who I'll have to learn more about, named Chase Oliver. So Chase Oliver will be the one carrying the ticket for the Libertarians and all along those lines. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on in that space and all along that kind of way. And in Bowling Green, it looks like I said, the weather is impacting a lot of people. And Governor Beshear has issued a state of emergency as tornadoes were hitting that area as well. So there were heavy winds in the Louisville area, causing multi-day restoration events and all in that space. And even Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders was in Benton County to assess storm damage. So definitely looks like those storms were hitting a lot of places, including 4 states and all along those lines. So like I said, oh, and by the way, we do still have that hush trial going on as well. So the Trump hush money trial is still going on in that space. So we'll see what happens when they come to a verdict, if they come to a verdict, or if it winds up being hung in all along those lines. So we'll definitely see what goes on in that space and all along those ways. By the way, a U.S. lawmaker visited Taiwan and vowed support in face of the Chinese military drills. So it does look like some lawmakers from the U.S. have been going to Taiwan to let them know that they will be backing them, as China has got its own opinions of what should be taking place in that part of the world as well. So a lot of things taking place in that area. I'm going to bring in Rick Rosner and also bring in Sasha Starr. By the way, on a lighter note and a more personal note, it was very good to get a chance to spend some time with my mom on Saturday because she turned 82 on Friday. So actually, though, she turned 82 on Friday. We celebrated with her on Saturday, and she liked to tell me she's going to try to make it a lot more years, and only God above and the whole divine vision and everything will determine whether she makes it or not. But I would not be surprised if mom doesn't make it to 100 and all along those lines. But it was good to spend time with her and other family members as well. So how are you doing, Rick? I hope you're having a good Memorial Day. The same with you, Sasha. And I see that Toby's in the background. He might join us also. But like I said,
congratulations to your mom. I'm okay. Hamas launched 100 rockets at Tel Aviv, but generally those rockets are knocked out of the sky without doing too much damage. I haven't heard that they killed anybody. Um, the number of casualties in Gaza has crossed 36,000. Those numbers are which come the from Hamas itself.
Right.
Are generally within a few percent once they're audited after the hostilities are over. So the overall number is probably reasonably accurate, but the split of who are women and children, I'd have more questions about that. But also, I've been trying to read about, and I don't see how Hamas is organized. Like, is it like a full-on military organization where they have ranks and generals and majors and it's tough to I think it would be tough to determine who's in Hamas and who isn't. So it's a mess.
It definitely sounds like a mess, but I would think, and this is just my opinion, I don't know, I didn't serve in the military. I know Sasha did, but it seems to me that a lot of guerrilla organizations, like you heard me talk about South Africa, and some people would say that ANC at one point was a guerrilla organization, even though it later became a more organized organization and everything. But a lot of times they intentionally don't have ranks, and they don't have the kind of system where you know who's in control and all along those lines. So yeah, I would agree with you. It's probably hard to assess who is in charge and everything, because I know
that leads to the question, if Israel wants to wipe out Hamas, how do you exactly wipe out an organization, a disorganized organization where people can, are in, definitely in Hamas, half in Hamas, sympathetic towards Hamas. I don't know.
I don't know either. I mean, one of the things that I can tell you is that, because like I said before, I was a member of Occupy back in the day and everything. And I know that one of the things that Occupy did was they intentionally did not have leadership for exactly that reason, because they didn't want necessarily for it to be easy to be accessible as to who was in charge and not in charge and all along those lines. So that was one of the principles, as I recall, of Occupy. And I could be wrong because it was several years back.
Then I've got one more question. Well, I got a bunch because my ignorance is wide. If the leadership of Hamas isn't even in Gaza, if it's in the rich countries like Qatar or Dubai, why is Israel trying to assassinate those guys? Because Israel, the Mossad, has a spy agency that historically has been pretty good at going after its enemies wherever they are. Maybe Sasha has thoughts on this.
Yes.
Well, I think that it's logistically very complicated to assassinate these leaders in countries like Qatar or United Arab Emirates. And even if you do that, the fruits of this attack are not obvious, and there will be outcry all over the world that, look, you killed innocent people in Qatar, how dare you are, and so on. It's Israel is in a difficult situation indeed, because all these actions like students' protests or so, they are well organized, well financed. It's working as a machine all over the world. Israel doesn't have an obvious weapon to fight this. However, it's doing a very good job at cleaning up the Hamas with a minimum of casualties among the civil population. Although the numbers provided by Hamas, okay, you can trust them or not so much, but even with these numbers in the warfare, where people are being used as a shield, and very density like nowhere in the world, Israel is doing a great job of trying to save as many lives as possible. And they're finding more and more hostages being killed. And I don't know how many are still alive, if any. And if that's the case, then Israel could act much more forcefully, because before there was a great consideration idea of saving hostages and releasing them and so on. But this is becoming more and more mute proposition, simply because nobody knows if there are any still alive.
Hey, Sasha and Rick, Jacoby brings up an interesting point, and it comes even to American and even Israel and a number of other places. But in the background, Jacoby was bringing up the notion that you can't really destroy an ideology, and some people would say that Zionism might be an ideology, or that the MAGA wing of the Republican Party might be an ideology, and there are a number of other ideologies that are out there as well. So, what is your take when Jacoby brings up this idea that you can't really destroy an ideology, whatever that ideology is? And there are ideologies on both the left and the right. And he was also saying that there has to be a better strategy. Saudi Arabia and the U.S. have a two-state solution on the table and everything. So,
I would like to remind Jacoby and people who think likewise that the Nazi ideology in the 30s looked to be absolute genius and absolutely irrefutable and amazing. And then by 1945, something else happened. Nazi ideology was killed. Today, there are some neo-Nazis, I know, all that stuff. But this is this is really a child play compared to the real Nazi ideology back in the 1930s. So is a communist ideology. Oh, it was great Soviet Union and it was fantastic, or so on. And where is the communist ideology today? People are becoming so dumb and lazy they can't even read Capital by Marx. And if you don't read Capital Marx, what kind of communist ideology you can promote and you can keep?
Well, what got rid of Nazism, is total defeat of the Germans, and then a very effective occupation for 4 years afterwards by more than 1 million troops, most, from America, from other allied countries, and it's not like you changed everybody's mind immediately. It's that you made Nazism illegal and you occupied the country for 4 years.
But and along those same lines, just really quickly, because you kind of dismissed it, but there has been a rise around the country of neo-Nazism, and all along those lines, and it's not just here in the U.S., it's been in other parts of the world as well, so we can dismiss it, but there are a lot of folks in various parts of the world that have that kind of ideology, that kind of a belief system, and all along those lines, I mean, there's the entire organizations that talk about the hate groups that exist, and they do talk about the anti-Semitic groups, and they also talk about the anti-Islamic groups, but definitely they talk about those that practice this kind of neo-Nazism and all along those lines. So I don't know that we can just totally dismiss it. I mean, there are some people that might even argue that part of the MAGA philosophy is rooted in some of those beliefs and everything. So, I mean, can we just totally dismiss this notion that it doesn't really weigh in and all along those lines? And just really quickly, hold on a second, Rick.
But historically, from 1945 at war's end to 1949, it was illegal, and that illegality was enforced by an occupation force. And
yeah, but I mean, but technically it's illegal here as well. But I don't know that anybody's really trying to go after the various groups that practice it and everything, because there are different chapters that practice different variations of right-wing philosophies and all along those lines. I don't know anybody is.
The vast majority of MAGAs are not Nazis, and I would say that a lot of U.S. people who are fans of Nazism are uneducated idiots who don't necessarily know every aspect of what they're kind of role-playing schmucks. But
no, I would agree with you on that.
So the number of anti-Semitic attacks in the U.S. has more than tripled in the past 5 years. But Nazism, as pure Nazism as a political force, is not a threat in the U.S. There are strains of xenophobia and in America First and other right-wing, philosophies, but there's no danger from actual Nazism in the U.S. right now.
That I would agree with and everything. But the one danger that does exist, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about this, and maybe Jacoby wants to jump in as well, and we'll see if anybody else joins us in the conversation and all along those lines. But as we were driving up to Mom's house, one of the things that my brother said that really struck me and everything along those lines is he felt, and you've kind of alluded to it, Sasha, I think you have alluded to it as well, that there is a real fear in the United States. And my brother said that it is very real possibility that Trump might get elected in November and everything. So what is your thoughts around that? Because he definitely was saying that he had a deep fear that there are enough people that will be sitting on their hands, or enough people that will not be concerned about the various things that are going against Trump, and that they will, those that are his fans will vote, and those that are not his fans will, like I said, sit on their hands and be the sit on the hand gang and everything. So he was saying that there's a real possibility.
Sasha will tell you that we have the greatest economy in U.S. history. But if you survey Americans, a majority of Americans think we have a terrible economy.
Right.
So I don't know how and the state of the economy often determines the outcome of the election. I don't know how you get Americans to pay attention and agree that the economy is pretty great right now.
Well, I think that the Democrats are doing a really horrendous job to promote the economy and how well it's doing, and the measures that the Democrats used to help economy or so on. They're not doing anything at all. I never heard anything, either on television or internet or so on, that the Democrats would even talk about it. That's horrible.
Yeah, I agree with Sasha that the Democrats seem to be leaning back instead of pushing forward with messaging. For instance, hold on, a few days ago, Trump said that Biden sent the FBI to assassinate him at Mar-a-Lago when they raided, because there was some verbiage about the FBI is allowed to use deadly force when confronted with deadly force. And Trump said that was Biden's order to assassinate him, which is complete bullshit. That language is in every FBI warrant, just saying that if somebody shoots at us, we have a right to shoot back. And so a complete lie from Trump. But I just saw an editorial in today's LA Times that said, hey, Biden, why did you not, make a public statement talking about Trump's bullshit?
But I mean, he has made a public statement about how they are coming after your dollars and all along those lines. Because I know I've seen this ad that's been running for a while about how they are coming after Social Security and how they're coming after some of the gains that were made with the Obama medical care and all along those lines. So there have been some more direct attacks that are being launched now and all along those lines and in that space and everything. So
just right now, I don't have confidence in, I don't know who's on Biden's election team. I just feel like, Obama's election team was very effective. And is it the same people? It's a weird election because we know who the candidates are 6 months ahead of time. Usually it's not settled for another few months. Is Biden's got more money in political contributions to buy ads? Is Biden just waiting until the election is 2-3 months away when more people are paying attention? I don't know. But yeah, I agree with Sasha that it's nervous making that we're not seeing more messaging.
Well, speaking of messaging, and I was going to bring this up and everything because we had shared it with us, and we don't know we have to watch all of it, but it talks about the rise of neo-Nazism and other things that are going on since we were going there and everything. So let's listen to this and see our reactions to parts of this as well.
The former leader of the extremist Proud Boys group, Enrique Tarrio, was sentenced to 22 years
All right. Well,
in prison today for his role in the January 6th attack. Laura Barone Lopez has more on what the sentence means and the larger threat of far-right extremism.
Enrique Tarrio's sentence is the harshest punishment handed down to date for those convicted for their involvement on January 6th. Tarrio led the Proud Boys, a white power group that played a critical part in carrying out the insurrection. The group is just one part of a trend, an increase in white supremacist and far-right violence. Those extremist movements, top U.S. law enforcement officials say, pose the biggest domestic terrorism threat facing the country. To discuss this, I'm joined by Kathleen Belew, a historian at Northwestern University and author of Bring the War Home, The White Power Movement in Paramilitary America, and Seamus Hughes of the University of Nebraska-Omaha's National Counterterrorism, Innovation, Technology, and Education Center. Kathleen and Seamus, thank you so much for joining us. Kathleen, to you first. Tarrio wasn't at the Capitol on January 6th because he was arrested a few days prior for setting fire to a Black Lives Matter banner, but he did direct his Proud Boys to attack the Capitol without him. What's the significance of this 22-year sentence and the domestic terrorism enhancement that was applied to it?
So the domestic terrorism enhancement is important because it recognizes the intent of the January 6th event. Now, when we're thinking about January 6th, we should always be thinking about a broad group of people, not all of whom had plans to become violent and storm the Capitol that day. But in the case of Tarrio and the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and affiliated groups who have now been found guilty and sentenced for seditious conspiracy, they were planning to do this. They were violent, and they're part of a long, decades-long movement of white power activists and militant right activists who have waged war on the United States since the early 1980s. So this is still not the maximum sentence. 22 years, you know, the headlines are reading long sentence, but the prosecutors were asking for 33. And in each case, the judge has handed it down below the recommended sentencing guidelines for these defendants.
Seamus, broadening this out, as Kathleen said, the Proud Boys are a part of a much larger movement, are also a part of this web of increased threats. You and researchers at your university have compiled data that shows that in the last 10 years, there have been more than 540 federal arrests for people who violently threatened public officials. Roughly 45% of those are ideological, often anti-government or racist in nature. 84% were for threats against election officials, candidates, lawmakers, law enforcement, and military. Seamus, when you look at all of these threats, all of these arrests that your researchers have compiled, along with these sentences that we've seen in relation to the January 6th insurrection, do you have any hope that recruitment or that recruitment will die down for such extremist groups, or that people will stop believing in these conspiracies and ideologies?
So unfortunately, the trend line tells us no, right? So if you look at domestic terrorism arrests in the last few years, the FBI was investigating 850 people 3 years ago. Now they're investigating 2,700. If you look at the trend lines of people who have been arrested for threats against public officials, that's going much, much higher. And so, no, I don't think necessarily arrests are going to stop this. It's going to be a larger issue in how to address this. But it's important for us as society to put a finger on the scale and say, this is unacceptable. We can't allow this happening. And so, of course, some people will say, you can't arrest your way out of this problem, but it is a first start for it.
And then, Seamus, I also want to run you through some of the recent threats, some specifics, details about them. All of the people here have either been arrested or sentenced this year. A Texas woman using racist slurs threatened to kill a black judge in the Trump January 6th case. An Illinois woman threatened Trump and his son Barron. A New Mexico man sent transphobic death threats to a Texas congresswoman. And then an Iowa man threatened to hang an Arizona election official. What is the trend that you see here?
Well, it's important to note that's all in the last 3 weeks, right? So the trend line's going up. You look at the Capitol Police put out their annual threat assessment every year. They said 7,500 active threats against elected officials in the Capitol, and that's been true for the last 5 years in terms of those numbers. Federal arrests for the last 10 years have steadily been rising. And so this is unfortunately a real problem. We've normalized violence and violent rhetoric in a way that's concerning. And it's not just, we clearly, when you look at the threats, You have a number of individuals that come from right-wing or anti-government extremists, but unfortunately, so there's some bipartisanship of our threats. So if you look at threats against Barron Trump, against Congressman Santos, against a number of the federal judges covering the Trump trial, this is unfortunately kind of pervasive throughout. And federal officials are starting to sit up and take notice of it.
Kathleen, when you look at Tarrio's actions and his sentencing, the racist killing of 3 black people in Jacksonville, Florida, a California woman who was killed for displaying a pride flag outside her store, are these all connected?
Absolutely. We are talking about a broad groundswell of white power activity, militant right activity. The Proud Boys have to be considered alongside other public-facing groups like the Oath Keepers and Two Percenters and similar groups like this, other January 6th groups, and also alongside the violent underground of this movement, which includes groups like Adam Waffen and the Base, may or may not eventually turn out to include other sorts of underground activity and other sorts of attack, and certainly includes the quote unquote lone wolf shootings in Jacksonville and Buffalo and Charleston and Christchurch and El Paso and Pittsburgh. We can go on and on and on. This is all part of the same movement. It is an opportunistic movement. It will use this moment for recruitment, as it always does. So it would be a huge mistake to think that these sentences will slow the activity of this movement. This is like cutting the head off a hydra. We are still very much under threat.
Seamus, do you think that Americans are becoming desensitized to this increased level of white supremacist extremist violence?
Absolutely. Unfortunately so. It reminds me of a lot of school shootings in terms of the ability for our public and our media to be able to move on to the next day. You know, Jacksonville is only a 24-hour story for folks out there where it's a real life and stays with the victims there forever. The problem when you talk about this is the normalization of violence, right? I worry less about the president and the former president getting threats or elected officials because there's a security apparatus to deal with that. My concern is the local election official who doesn't have that apparatus, doesn't know who to call when they get those threats. The people, we look at the threats of individuals who've been arrested the last 10 years. There's plenty of examples of individuals who ran for city council, got a threat, and said, I don't want to do this anymore. So we have to talk about the slow burn of democracy on this one. This does affect how we address and how we are as a society.
Kathleen Ballou of Northwestern University and Seamus Hughes of the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Thank you both for your time.
All right, so
that was some interesting perspective and I did hear and Rick and everything. But the thing I was going to add to that is that is on both sides, because I do know that some people would consider the Black Hebrew Israelites as a hate group to some degree and everything, even though I don't know that I totally agree with that and everything. And of course, as even Jacoby has mentioned, Antifa can be seen as a hate group as well. So I'm wondering if there's not a rise in hate groups in general and everything. But I just wonder your take on it.
It's right wing. I mean, everybody acknowledges, including the FBI, that the hate is coming from the right. And there's a lack of enforcement of the big shots who are behind it, which is a common and I think accurate criticism, like Mark Meadows, who was kind of in charge of Trump's right-hand man for January 6th. And I think he's been charged in something, but there's been I haven't seen him being subpoenaed, showing up in court. Ginny Thomas, the wife of Clarence Thomas, was a huge force in pushing January 6th and remains a force. No enforcement against her, no action, lots of words from Congress, but no actual attempts to pass legislation to hold her to account. So there's been a hesitancy from normal politicians to avoid offending right-wing politicians, which has probably been harmful.
Yeah, just really quickly, and this is for Sasha. I know one of the other things that Toby had mentioned earlier before bringing up that video was this notion, and I mentioned it earlier about what China's doing and what other people are doing. as well. So whether you want to call it communism, whether you want to call it socialism, or what are the terms we want to use, that there is still Nazism around, and not just the U.S., but also around the world. And there's definitely still communism around the world as well. So, Sasha, what's your take on that? And is there those just dead ideologies that are not being incorporated? Because there are some people that part of the argument you hear in American politics is that some of those ideologies are seeping into mainstream democracy or mainstream Republican ideologies and all along those lines. So are you saying that those, and you even got people that are wearing shirts that don't even know who they're wearing. I've oftentimes seen people and brought up that people might have Che Guevara or even Malcolm X and not even have an idea of what their actual philosophies were, or even Mao Zedong and other folks. So what is your take on this notion that maybe there is more influence of, say, either communism or Nazism in the world politics?
It's a difficult question because in each country, in each province, in each city, on even the street, there could be neighboring ideologies coexisting and sometimes fighting with each other. But there is no dominant ideology in the world that, and probably never been, even in the heydays of Nazi. Nazi was short-lived, 12 years or so, from 33 to 45. Communism lasted a little bit longer, but by fluke, only because of victory of Russia in Second World War. If it wouldn't be that, the communism would end up much earlier than that. However, if you take country by country, let's see, if you take Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, some others, like Denmark and Finland, you don't see any prevailing ideology. And I visited all this country and more than once, and they're very peaceful. There's not much talk about ideology. It's not in the mass media. If you take Western Europe, almost the same thing. Whether it's take Germany, France, UK. There are discussions sometimes, and especially in university circles, it's much more evident than anywhere else. But again, it doesn't affect everyday's life of these people, and they mind their business, their professions, their families, their other stuff.
Sasha, just along those same lines really quickly, one of the things I've heard people say, and maybe Rick's got some thoughts around this as well, is that the best countries are those that actually blend different components of these different philosophies in. There are some people that would argue that even in the U.S. that we have some socialistic kind of things that go on, whether that's welfare, whether that's other programs also, that while it is primarily a capitalist country, that there are some trends that might have been adapted from other economic philosophies as well. So is that maybe the best way to handle things, is to kind of like get the best traits of all of these kind of philosophies, and primarily the primary.
All right. So the one of the best ways to get things done without a bunch of idiots gumming things up is to be a tiny country. Estonia, a very well-run, very modern country, has 1.5 million people, like less than 1/200th of the U.S.'s population, which has 1/3 of a billion people. And when you have 1/3 of a billion people, that means you have tens of millions of idiots who can be riled up and made to act against their own.
Rick, along those same lines, one of our fellow co-hosts and everything loves to talk about this notion of how great Singapore is, and all along those lines. And Adam oftentimes will bring up that it is under a benevolent dictator.
Yeah, but Singapore is basically
a benevolent dictator running you. Because I mean, even Trump has talked about this notion of creating a third term and all along these lines. So do we really want a benevolent dictator?
But Singapore is basically a big city. Right. You call it a country, but it's a teeny country, And it's just basically a city on a little chunk of land. It's much easier to run a city and to make it super modern than to take a whole nation that's 3,000 miles by 1,500 miles, and you've got these, like, you have these fake news companies like Fox News that keeps its viewers in a perpetual state of fear and anger about culture war issues and about threats that are exaggerated. And it's hard to get stuff done when you have people who have an agenda to screw things up and keep us paralyzed.
Well, speaking of getting things done, I'm going to pivot to a slightly lighter note and everything. But you heard me earlier mention, and maybe it's just me, but if you're in the middle of a storm, because there's been some severe weather and all along those lines, why are you going to hide? Rick, you're a very smart man. Why are you going to hide in a gas station? Last time I checked, gas stations are very explosive. They've got a lot of explosive things that are there in the gas station. So when I read that article, I'm sitting there going, like, that seems like the worst place to go of all places.
I assume that there's some kind of where to go map that gets you to the closest place with things that probably won't get ripped out of the ground. I know that, like, a general piece of advice is go to your cellar if there's a twister coming. And if you don't have a cellar, get in the bathtub, because your tub is made out of steel under the porcelain, and it likely won't get ripped out of the ground. And if you're hunkered down, it'll protect you from falling stuff. So I assume, that the gas station was just the nearest durable structure. And if you look at the gas station that they're showing on the TV, it wasn't that durable. It got entirely ripped out of the ground. But you go to the nearest place that you have hope of surviving.
That makes sense. I just couldn't figure it out because, like I said, I know that gas stations are made up of a lot of very explosive material. Gas can definitely.
But the building itself, there's a restroom there. You hunker down like under the sink. You hope that it's built out of cinder blocks, and you hope that you're like 60 feet away from the exploding pumps. And I don't think the pumps did explode.
Well, that makes sense. Hopefully they didn't explode and all along those lines. I was just trying to figure that out and everything. I did have a question to ask you, Toby, about video games, and I'll get to that when we wind down, but we still got a few more minutes to go and everything. Sasha, it does look like the war is raging in Russia and Ukraine. It looks like both sides are getting equipment and all along those lines. But I'm just wondering, on this particular day, on Memorial Day, as the U.S. is honoring a lot of its fallen soldiers, and there have been a lot of fallen soldiers there in Ukraine and everything, how confident are you that this war is about to end, and will it end without a ceasefire? So how confident are you about the end of this particular war and all along those lines?
There are two outcomes. One is a complete surrender of Ukraine, and Russia will take over all of it and make it as a part of Russia. Same as Ukraine, essentially, although it being called republic, but it was part of Soviet Union until 1991. So something like that will happen, especially if the US and Western countries will stop helping Ukraine. So definitely it will be overrun by Russia in the long term. Now, if help will continue, and in fact, if it will become more meaningful, then Ukraine will start attacking Russians on all Ukrainian territory, and not only but Russian territory, as they are doing now. They have drones that can hit Russian targets on a distance of 1,000 kilometers and more. And in this case, it will be the end of Putin's regime and disintegration of Russia.
Hey, just along those same lines and everything, it's my understanding, and you were part of that force way back in the day and everything, but is it the truth? Because I'm hearing some speculation and some rumors that a lot of these attacks have pretty much knocked out the Russian Navy and everything, because that's something that I heard over the weekend, and I was going like, wow, that used to be one of the big navies of the world and everything, but it seems like the Navy has been totally decimated. So how much of the Navy is left, I guess is my question to you from what you're hearing, because when I read or heard the different reports, including some on TV, it sounds like their Navy is pretty much toast.
The Navy, yeah, once that it was based in Crimea is no longer exists, and so they relocated to, say, Novorossiysk, which is farther south from Crimea, some other places. So, but again, it's not effective Navy. It's hiding from Ukrainian attacks right now. So it cannot help. The only real advantage where Russians still have, of course, it's air, lacking of Ukrainian air defenses. And that's where Russians have still advantage, but it may change in next few weeks.
You said a couple of weeks ago, you said that Ukraine was on the verge of cutting off of there's like a bridge that goes to Crimea.
Yeah.
Are they making progress?
Okay, Crimea is being supplied from the bridge that we are talking about, the Kerch Bridge, or Crimea Bridge, you can call it, and the corridor between Donbass, which going south, and from that place, the Crimea can be supplied. So there are 2 points of supply. Now, if you cut one supply, which is a bridge, it's not enough because it can still be supplied from this corridor. But if you cut both this corridor and the bridge, and preferably at the same time, then that's the end of Crimea. Then Crimea will fall into Ukrainian hands easily.
You said that was likely to happen in the near future. Do you still think that, or did I misunderstand?
Okay. Right now, the defense of Kharkiv is a very high priority for Ukraine, and so it ties up considerably Ukrainian armed forces. But it seems to me that Russians stop any advances, or at least not by design. Ukrainians actually stop them from any advance towards Kharkiv, and they're making progress of 5-10 meters a day, and that can be dismissed. Now the attacks from the air by missiles and the avia bombs, that's much more considered damage to people of Kharkiv, because quite a few of them are being killed in every day's attack. The attacks are continued every day. So I think that it will be still time, first of all, to make sure that the Kharkiv will be unassailable. Second of all, to collect more and more weapons that are coming from the West. And what I heard is that every 9 minutes there is a transport plane from the United States are landing in Europe, primarily in Germany or in Poland, to bring more and more weapons for Ukraine. So once these weapons will be collected and start being used, some of them are already being used, it will change drastically the picture in Ukrainian front.
Hey, just really quickly, I saw that the Lithuanian president is looking to win his second term. So how important is Lithuania to the war as well? Because apparently they are winning. This gentleman, Nasedia, and it looks like it was shaped by this fear that they might be a target as well. And I don't know enough about that part of the world, so that's why I'm turning to you, Sasha. How important of an election is this election?
I don't know. Not sure if this election is much more important than any other elections in Lithuania. It's a small country. This is a very homogeneous country that, if not 100%, but close to that, are populated by Lithuanians, which have their own language, they have their own history, which is quite colorful because 3-4 centuries ago, Lithuania, together with Poland, which it had the union, they had it was probably the biggest European country at that time, and only later on it started to disintegrate. So today's Lithuania, it's a very tiny part of the Polish-Lithuanian Empire about 300-400 years ago. So today Lithuania is a part of the European Union. It's part of NATO. It's a staunch supporter of Ukraine, and it's logical because if Putin will prevail in Ukraine, then most likely Baltic states, including Lithuania, will be his next targets.
Yeah. And it's coming back to another part of the world, and I'd love to hear your thoughts around this, Rick, as we get ready. We can go a few minutes over since we started a little bit late and everything. But just really quickly, it looks like Mexico is about to elect a woman prime minister or a woman leader. Either it'll be Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum, or it'll be the former Senator Xochitl Galvez, and there are some women that are in Latin America that are wondering if that's going to improve their life, because apparently there was a lot of women that were doing domestic work, and there was even this notion that they might even be forms of domestic slavery going on in that space as well. So will a woman leader there or a woman leader anywhere make it an improvement? And all
I'm underinformed about Mexico as to whether different leaders really make a difference in the quality of life there, or whether it all kind of hinges on the cartels losing power, which they're not. So, all we hear about out of Mexico, and maybe some of it is propaganda designed to, increase fear, is that, it's got a completely corrupted military and police. The cartels have enough money that they can just either buy off everybody or intimidate them with or just murder them if they don't go along. So I don't know.
Well, it looks like they might have the same issues that some people say we have in the U.S., because apparently Mexico and much of Latin America, there's a gap that has long divided men and women into the workplace. They said in 2005, which I know was 20 years ago and everything, or a little bit less than 20 years ago, 80% of men were employed or looking for jobs compared to 40% of women. And that's according to Mexican government data. And apparently there's have some severe disparities in salary and the leadership role. And apparently a lot of the women were going into domestic work and all along those lines. So it does look like there has been even some legislation, landmark legislation, granting domestic workers basic rights like paid leave, limits on working hours, and access to health insurance. So it does look like there might have been some inequalities that I guess some of these leaders are going to be trying to address. So definitely it looks like there are 98% of their domestic workers that are yet to enroll in health insurance. So they might be trying to find a way to get some better things going on in their life.
So I don't know what Mexican people think about, in a normal day. Like I, if I were in Mexico, I would say not getting murdered would be more important than equal wages. But if most, like Mexico City, is it mostly safe from corruption? I don't know. Mexico City, has 25 million people. It's one of the world's biggest cities, and is it safe? If so, I mean, Mexico City is basically most of Mexico in a way. And, if life there is, less dominated by fear of their cartels, then yeah, maybe that's an issue that can be addressed.
Yeah, could
but
be
like
issue.
in Juarez, like there have been for decades, there have been not mass killings, but like just huge numbers of women disappear and are murdered just on a regular basis.
Yeah. Well, the last story that I'm going to give it to, and like I said, it was a lighthearted one, but it did come up in our family gathering and everything. Rick, this one is for you, since you are a fan of kind of like society news and all along those lines. And apparently this took place several months back and all along those lines, but I just heard about it because my nephews are into games and all along those lines, and one of them was into the game called Tetris. And apparently there was a 13-year-old from Oklahoma that did something that used to be considered impossible. he beat Tetris. So apparently he's believed to be the first human gamer to reach level 157 of that classic video game. So I'm thinking that maybe he's going to get like an automatic scholarship to MIT or something, because he's only 13 years old, and apparently he's done the impossible, and back in January beat Tetris. So I'm sitting there going like, wait a minute, because apparently he's a streamer, guy by the name of Blue Scuddy, and he became the first human. So and apparently he's broken 3 world records in total. So
old school video games like Tetris just got harder at every level, to the point where they weren't actually beatable.
Right.
This kid developed techniques that are not really, I mean, Tetris, you got falling bricks and you're moving them around, and eventually the game gets so fast that no human or even a machine could move stuff fast enough. But this kid developed like fast twitch techniques that kind of short circuit the game in a way. It's not really playing Tetris. It's figuring out some way of clicking so fast that he came up with a gimmick that beat the game. It's not that so I mean, yeah, it's pretty amazing. What I remember from Tetris, and a lot of people report this, is, you know, I spent a lot of quarters playing Tetris in the bar I worked at, and you play for half an hour and then you walk away, and it's rewired your brain a little bit temporarily. So when you walk out into the world, all you see are like the world broken up into falling bricks. It's the same thing as, like, you know, that if you're looking at naked ladies and then you go out into the real world, you have to remind yourself that no, that the women you see are not, you know, for your pleasure. They're, you know, that it rewires your brain, and not necessarily in a good way.
I don't know about that, because I did see one of my neighbors who is convinced plays either basketball or volleyball, and she was walking her dog, and she definitely did look like she had those long, sexy legs and everything. So yeah, you did wind up catching those views, yes, and all along those lines.
So when I go to the gym and I'm looking, and I have to remind myself I don't have to stare at this person working out, because it's creepy. B, you know, I've been married for 33 years. And C, and most importantly, I can go home and I can look at all the naked people I want. I don't need to stare at somebody, you know, on the leg press machine.
Yeah. Hey, Sasha, just really quickly, because I know one of your other big interests, and this is the interest around investment. But one of the things that I was doing, and this wasn't actually when I was visiting Mom, it was on another day. It might have been either Saturday or Friday. I was watching a videotape of Scott Galloway, who we know is a motivational speaker and all along those lines. And he was saying that while NVIDIA is doing well, he actually felt that the new wave that people need to pay attention to is something called GLP-1 drugs. So it's kind of like those weight suppressant drugs, because obesity is a big problem, but apparently they can also stop other cravings as well. So some of these drugs that are existing from some of our American companies like Lilly's, and I want to say even Glaxo, are things that can suppress your appetite, but then they might also suppress other cravings as well. So he was saying that if you look at the market share, that while NVIDIA is doing well, and he did admit that NVIDIA is doing quite well, that people might want to be looking at GLP-1 drugs and all along those lines. So I just wanted your take. Is that something that you'll be investing in? Because I know you're very big in NVIDIA, but he was definitely saying that some of these type drugs can alleviate various cravings, not just the cravings that help you lose weight, but that they can also impact some of our other cravings as well.
Well, this is a dilemma for many stock advisors and analysts and so on. The NVIDIA is so obvious success story that something similar to what NVIDIA is doing now never happened in the history of US markets. So how they can distinguish themselves rather than repeating, yes, NVIDIA is absolutely fantastic stuff. So who needs them if that's all what they're going to say. So they're all trying to find some kind of a specialty, whether it's a good call or not so good call. It doesn't matter, but they have something unique to say, to distinguish themselves, to get eyeballs, to get probably more advertisers on their side, whatever they're doing. So to tell the truth, for a long time, I've dismissed all stock advisors and analysts and stock pickers and all these people like Warren Buffett and all other stuff. Not for me. You can talk to anybody who is ready to listen to you. Now I'm listening only to one person. It's myself, nobody else.
Sounds good. Well, on that note, we're getting ready to get on
Well,
out of here.
I read about Tetris really quickly.
Right.
What the kid did was he crashed the machine at level 157.
Right.
And these guys, the super high level players, they don't do the normal things. They have these, like this kid, the high level players train their hands to vibrate like they've got like something wrong with them so fast that it's not really playing the game the way it was intended to play. It's playing it in order to, break it eventually. And that's what the kid did. He managed to confuse the game so much that it just gave him the blue screen of death. If you remember that
It looks like he broke the machine, and that's what my brother and others had said, because I think my nephews were trying to say what some of their favorite games were, and it was some of the standard ones like Call of Duty and other ones. My brother was actually teasing them for that list, because he was going like, is that your personal list or is that the actual list? Because he was claiming that was the actual list of the top games and all along those lines. Really quickly, I think that I don't know, as a matter of fact, I know we're not doing economics and media. I don't know if they're going to do Times Share Solutions, which is at 1 o'clock, but they'll be back with both of those shows on next week. And of course, we'll be back tomorrow. And we've actually got a security specialist that reached out to me, and we talked yesterday. So I'm expecting him to be here, but he is one of those folks, and he might even be from the Middle East. I'm not sure, but he has been training police officers on how to deal with situations, including kind of like what went on with George Floyd and others. So I'm looking forward to having Yuri on tomorrow. So he should be a interesting guest. And of course, we'll have some more of these very interesting conversations as well. So Sasha and Rick, and also Jacoby in the background, glad that y'all joined me on this particular day, and we'll see y'all on tomorrow. And I know that tomorrow we've also got the show around Russia, Ukraine, and China as well. So looking forward to all of these continuing conversations, and I will see both of you gentlemen on tomorrow, as well as Jacoby back there in the back.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.